What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in our sixth and our final week of this Joseph series that we've been going through during this winter season. We had a little break in there, but finishing it off strong now.
Mm-hmm. We are.
Are you ready to get into it?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, let's go.
Okay. Yeah, it was a 6-week series, and we had in the middle, we had a day, our Foster Awareness Day, where we had Goshen Valley here, and Sarah preached, and then we have one more week before we actually get into the season of Lent, and we're having a missionary, Thomas Agunta, here next Sunday. So it lined up pretty well to kind of get us through the winter months after Christmas, and I enjoy the story of Joseph. It was a good story to tell, and lots to learn from.
There is a lot to learn from, and I kind of appreciate how we've kind of been walking through kind of step by step, and we are kind of coming to this culmination, that final episode in the series. And why don't you just jump in for us?
We talk about the culmination of like worlds colliding and everything.
Yeah.
Because I finished the Exodus Bible study that I'm teaching on this past Wednesday night.
Yeah.
I finished this series, which is actually the end of Genesis. So I have to think about this because I'm finishing up Genesis, but I just also finished up Exodus, but not in the same order. And there's a little bit of an overlap.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was overlapped is where the brothers settled, which is Goshen, which is where Goshen Valley, the foster ministry that we're working with, that's where they get that name,
right?
Which is and we'll get into that in a second as we go through this story. So all of these things are kind of colliding here. It was kind of cool, and also we'll get to this in the chapter we're looking at today. But when Joseph died, he wanted his bones carried back to Canaan or to Israel eventually, and in Exodus, when we were doing it, when we were studying about the Exodus, one of the things they had to retrieve and bring with them was Joseph's bones. So, kind of nonlinear and out of sequence, but it's all kind of come together here during these few days, and certainly here on this.
What are those like happy little accidents of
happy little accidents? Yeah,
how it all kind of comes together.
But and. One of the things about preaching a series, though, which particularly is a story like this, is that, we have folks that aren't here every week, and then we had several visitors today, and so, you kind of have to catch up every week. We've kind of done that with the podcast as well, but it is the story of Joseph with a coat of many colors, not Joseph, the father of Jesus. And so... we started off with, Joseph's family of origin, which his dad's name was Jacob, another famous Old Testament guy. And Jacob had a lot of kids, a lot of boys and girls, but he had 12 sons, and Joseph was the favorite. And the brothers were jealous of him and hated him, and they were going to kill him. But they ended up just selling him into slavery, selling him into slavery. But so that started him on a course of a really dark, 20 years. Yeah. Initially being a slave until he was double-crossed by his slave owner's wife, who he would not. She was trying to seduce him, and he wouldn't give in. Yep. So she double-crosses him. He ends up in jail, and so he's there for a while. But then he's able to interpret some dreams of some people that were close to Pharaoh. And he says, hey, when you get out, remember me. Tell Pharaoh, I'm in here, and I shouldn't be. Get me out of here. I'm good? Okay. All right. Okay, where was that? So yeah, get me out of here. And so, but the guy forgets about him until a few years later. And then Pharaoh has a bad dream or has a weird dream. And so at that time, he remembers them, and they call for Joseph, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. And part of this dream was that, for 7 years, there was going to be a really time of economic prosperity, and then that was going to be followed by 7 years of famine, and they needed to get ready for it. and Pharaoh, Joseph advised Pharaoh, you need to get somebody who can lead that, be in charge of that. And Pharaoh said, hey, you look like a pretty good guy to do that. So he suddenly comes from being in prison to being there in second in command in all of Egypt. And so it was famine everywhere. And so his brothers back in Canaan had to, find food wherever they could. They heard there was some in Egypt. So they go to buy food. And then there is Joseph.
Right.
Now, they don't recognize him at first. Joseph recognizes them. He is sought to be reconciled, or he's had this longing, I'm sure. And so, but he has to kind of put them through some tests to make sure he could trust them. And eventually he is able to, and he reveals himself to them. And so there's this big, reunion. And he says, it's going to continue to be bad. So you need to go home, get all your families, get my father, and y'all need to move to Egypt at least for a time.
Right.
So that is a summary.
That was the Cliff Notes of the whole thing.
Yeah. I think I did better in church.
You did fine.
But anyway.
But it's something you guys don't see is that there was a lot of little distractions popping in from a production guy. We had a couple of guys hitting the door. So
yeah.
I think all things considered, you handled that pretty well like a professional.
I was having trouble concentrating for a second there. But yeah, so here we find ourselves in the story. Joseph has just been reunited with his brothers. And so he sends them away to go back and get all their belongings to come there. And there was one little sentence that almost could be like a little throwaway sentence. Like it's just something you say. But he says to them, don't quarrel. Don't quarrel along the way.
Yeah.
As you're going to doing this, as you're going back home, as you're getting your families, as you're moving here, don't quarrel. And so, I kind of stuck on that as I was reading through and getting ready for the sermon. I was going like, what? Why would he say that? Why is that in the Bible?
I know. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about that in service, I was kind of thinking, I was like, yeah, I mean, moving is kind of stressful. So to pick up and to go and to not quarrel, to kind of find this peace and stuff like that. That's just the physical part of it. But
I really just think there's a great wisdom in that. And one of the teaching points that we can take away from the story is that it's advice, you know. Don't quarrel. Now, there were, I think, a couple of reasons, and one of them will come back in and we'll talk about it in a second, is that he realized that this was fresh. This forgiveness, this reconciliation was fresh. And they had carried this burden, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts and previous sermons. They had carried this burden for 20 years. They had done this horrible, terrible thing to their brother. Yeah. And they had watched their father suffer because of it. And they had to keep this secret for 20 years. Yeah. And even though now things were better and reconciled, they still have been wired. They have these habits of dealing with each other. All of this is still there. And he's just saying, don't quarrel. Just move on. And so I think we can take that. And the second half of that, I think you hit the nail on the head on that, is life's transitions can be very stressful times. Yeah. And if we're not careful, we can kind of slip into quarreling and not getting along and snipping at one another. And so I think that's a great advice for us.
Yeah, I found it interesting, and I'm not sure, when Joseph's dad dies, Jacob dies, like you mentioned in the service how the brothers probably kind of had this like, oh man, now that he's gone, is Joseph going to kind of get back at us? So I feel like this is like a kind of a theme through this kind of part of the story is these brothers just very uncertain of what their future holds, and probably it's, as you kind of said, this guilt kind of coming back up, bubbling up that, oh no, we're about to go down because of what we did in the past, that maybe they couldn't even forgive themselves fully.
Exactly. But Joseph had forgiven them. They could not forgive themselves. Yeah. And the way they're wired up and the way this family dynamic was to blame each other. Yeah. For whatever. And so, we'd already seen it in some scriptures. I think we looked at a few of them last week. Reuben, when when Joseph is testing them, accuses them of being slaves, he says that, this is happening because of what we did to Joseph, and I told you guys not to do that.
Yeah.
I begged you not to do that. And so they're already doing this blame shifting thing. And so I think Joseph shows great discernment and wisdom in saying, don't quarrel. You need to move on. So when we get to the point where you just alluded to, when Jacob dies, again, they haven't truly forgiven themselves.
Yeah.
So they're thinking the only reason that Joseph is being nice to us is they wanted to see their father. He wanted their father again, and he was keeping it together for the dad.
And now it's go time.
And now it's go time.
Yeah.
Now it's go time. And he says, no, come close. He says, I'm going to take care of you. And this is one of the key points, and you've seen it on plaques in kitchens and, posts on Instagram. What people intended for harm, for evil, God used for good.
Yeah.
It's a very famous, it's in Genesis 50, it's a very famous scripture in Genesis. And so, that's something we can lean into and think of as we're trying to live a faithful life, is to realize bad things are going to happen to us. Mm-hmm. But if we follow Jesus, God will work it out for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also was kind of thinking about this in terms of like how hard would it have been to forgive myself? But then I started trying to think about people who have been like kind of offering that extraordinary peace, like, because I feel like Joseph here is really kind of offering a hand that, by all means, he probably could have been like, you know what, I'm gonna get back at my brothers now, but he doesn't. You know what I mean? And he takes a stance of wanting to be kind of this bridge maker, this peacemaker in this space. And I started thinking about people in my life who I just feel like have been extraordinarily peaceful people, mm-hmm. and how they often would not do what you would expect them to do, like just what you would assume, like, because I think we assume, how we might act is how somebody else would act, but they always kind of step out of that, and it's like, it just feels like something that's more than them. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think, those kinds of people, to make peace within yourself.
Yeah.
And I think Joseph had longer to work on it, for one thing.
Sure.
But at some point, you're in jail. You're a slave. You got to, if you're going to survive, you got to make some sort of peace with it.
Yeah.
And so he made his peace with God. This has happened. What's the next right thing? That was a 2 weeks ago sermon. Right. But yeah, and so he is already there, and I think he recognized in his brothers that it was going to take them some time to get there, because they've been dealing with this from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
But they've been dealing with it for a long time as well. And since he was the injured one, it was all, not that it makes it any less easy, less hard, more easy.
Yeah.
But he was in kind of in a position where he could just kind of deal with it himself, where the brothers had this whole dynamic thing going. And so, Jacob dies. He thinks we're going to get it now. Joseph says, no, I'm going to take care of you.
Come on. Yeah.
God's worked this thing out.
Yeah.
And so in this moment of time, through Joseph's faithfulness and through God's grace, it's become a pretty good spot for a few generations for the children of Israel.
Yeah.
Now, it won't last, because a Pharaoh is going to come along who doesn't remember Joseph. But they have a respite. They're there in the land of Goshen, and they have their lives, and Joseph's faithfulness has led to some fruitfulness for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of jumped back a little bit as you were talking, but you were talking about how God doesn't cause the evil, but is able to kind of work through it. And I thought that was such a strong point and a strong message, because there's oftentimes I'll be talking to people and they kind of just do this like, well, God makes all things happen, it's a test or whatever. And I just never have fully aligned to that. And I think that's kind of what you were saying as well.
Yeah, I think we have to unpack this. This verse can be used and how it's tweaked or interpreted in Scripture, and I actually think of the way it was worded in NIV.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like God caused all of this happen.
Right.
This was God's intention. I don't think it's ever God's intention for harm to come to us.
Yeah.
You can will like God knows all things, so therefore God knew this was going to happen. And so, but when you take free will out of the equation, to me, you get on a slippery slope about what you think about God.
Yeah.
So God knew that they were going to do all these things, but God didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But yet He's all powerful. So God in His great love gives us the ability to make decisions and have free will in that.
Right.
And so His brothers made some horrible, decisions. And so therefore, that directly affected Joseph.
Yeah.
He didn't make these decisions, but yet he has to deal with them. And so, where is God at work in that? And one thing is that, God does not will evil, but He works through it. And God doesn't desert us at any point in our life.
Yeah.
God is there with us through that. So even though we may be suffering, God will be there suffering with us and be there along with us, and He can transform the suffering and redeem it.
Yeah.
I think the overarching, I think the key point I was trying to make is that human free will and divine redemption work together. God has an ultimate will that He is working out through us human beings. And so there is a place, and we can read about it in Revelation, and we affirm it when we say the affirmation of faith every week. But yeah, we have this belief in what is coming. But now here in the world that we are in, we are to live faithfully trying to bring God's kingdom on earth.
Yeah.
And so even way back before Jesus and everything, with Joseph, we see that modeled.
Right. Now, because that's a lot to kind of think through, is this grand plan happening, and we're kind of working in between it and stuff like that. Do you think it's one of those things where we're all trying to get to a point where it's like, okay, we're filling up this meter of when God can press the final button or whatever? Or is it more that He just He kind of knows where we're all moving? Does this make sense?
It does. I think it's one of those mysteries
Yeah.
of faith. I think what we're called to do is just be faithful in the space that we're in,
Yeah.
and in the time that we're in, and to let that take care of of itself.
Yeah.
No one knows the day or the time. We just are faithful in the moments that we have, in the short life that we have.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions that I've asked each week is, so where do you find yourself in the story? And as this was the final message in the series, the big question I ask is, what is your witness going to be?
Yeah.
That's one of the things I think we can all learn from the story of Joseph, and watch what his witness is, why he is such a hero, a biblical hero, a hero of our faith, is because of the witness of how he lived our lives.
Yeah.
Lived his life through the struggles that he had, through the pain that he had, through all that he went through. He was a faithful witness. So how are we going to live our lives? And so, my challenge be that when difficulties come, and they will, when they come, is to remember that God is neither the cause of evil, because we can go down off that cliff, that God didn't cause us evil, nor is He distant from us in our suffering, but that God is going to work and redeem that brokenness and make us even stronger through that. So, we're just called to trust Him, to surrender to Him, and to participate in that redemptive process of the kingdom of God coming here on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. I think of the word legacy a lot when you say stuff like that. And I feel like I've talked to several people who are kind of in the tail end of their life, and they start thinking about legacy. But it's something that for some reason I think quite often about, is how will I be remembered, and how will people see will people see how I walk the walk as a walk that's worth mimicking or following. Not that I want people to look to me for answers, but just I hope I'm leading people well. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
I'm only 40, but like that is something that I really strive to be somebody worth following. And I see this in the story of Joseph. And I mean, really, the story of Joseph is unique in what happened to him, but it's not unique in the overall situations of just somebody, you got a person here who goes through ups and downs of life.
Family members betrayed him.
Where family members betrayed
That
him.
happens
Right.
every day.
Right.
Somewhere.
And how he walked is why we talk about him. You know what I mean?
A person told lies about him and made him be punished for it.
Yeah.
That happens every day.
Every day.
I mean, all those things are not unique human experiences. Yeah, how they were exactly with Joseph may be very different.
Right.
But the big metaphor of it all is common to most of us.
Right.
That's why I think it's such a great story. A little epilogue to it. Joseph does die.
Yeah.
And makes this promise with his brothers about taking his bones back to Canaan. And so I do think there is this part was like, he and the brothers, they all knew that wasn't going to be where they were forever.
Yeah.
That this wasn't home. This wasn't the land that God had promised Abraham and, Isaac and Jacob and them. So, I thought that was interesting because they were there for a long time. The Israelites were.
Right.
Generations, Joseph and all his people and brothers had all died out, and it was a whole nother generations before, a new Pharaoh came to power. And there were probably several, I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at the history of that, but several other Pharaohs before this one finally had this mistrust. But I like what you said about legacy.
Yeah.
And it is something that I'm kind of thinking about now. I'm, not at the end of my life, but it maybe just a few more years in ministry. And so what do I want to be remembered by? I think it's just an important question for all of us at every age and stage. What are we building towards?
Yeah.
And then for someone maybe in my space is how do I finish well?
Yeah.
And I like, do you want to be remembered as somebody who was kind, who put family first, who, had all these other things that we would say is important? Or do you want to be remembered for, what you did?
Right.
What your job was. And so, I think it's more of those core beliefs that we have that I think at the end of the day that we want to be remembered for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something we can kind of walk away as like our, how do we kind of follow in Joseph? There's several, as we talked about through the podcast the last 6-7 weeks, is there are bits and pieces along the way of stuff that we can look at in our individual lives now and how we implement it today. But to kind of take it forward, and the reason why the Bible just feels like it's always speaks to us is it leaves us with something to continue to work towards. And whether it's that legacy or whether it's just working our best to live as faithful of a life as we possibly can, I think that's why it's important to study these stories. I know some people are like, I only care about the New Testament because of Jesus and all that stuff. But there's so much wisdom and like real life stuff happening in the Old Testament as well that I think we can learn from. And I've always been one of those people. It's like, try to learn from other people's mistakes so you don't make the same mistakes. But with that, we are, to kind of wrap up, we are, as Dave said earlier, we're in this kind of transitional time from this winter series. We're moving towards Lent. But we do have a couple things right here in between. As Dave mentioned earlier about Goshen Valley, I think this will be posted early on Wednesday. So if you see it in time, Wednesday nights here at the church, we're bringing back an organization that we've been kind of working with over the last month or so called Goshen Valley. They're a foster care group here in Canton that has just been doing a lot of good in our area. So they're actually doing kind of a fostering information session, but it's not just for people who are wondering about how to be a foster parent, although it is for those people.
That's part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also for people who might just be looking to help where they can in the process, and to maybe just learn more about the issues going on within it. So if that is something that interests you, in our sanctuary at 6 o'clock, and this is open to anybody in the community, so you can invite your neighbors, your friends, anybody you think might be interested in just hearing about this, come join us 6 o'clock here in the sanctuary. But then also next Sunday, we have Thomas Agutu, who is does a ministry in Africa.
In Kenya, yeah.
Do what?
In Kenya.
In Kenya.
Yeah. Which is in Africa.
Which is in Africa. They're doing schools and working with students in the area.
He works with the orphans and widows. He builds houses with widows. He works with orphans. And and we have, I think there's 9 church members that sponsor children there
So
in
they
that
can go to
school, in
school.
the
That's what it
orphan
is.
schools. And so he's coming back to give us an update on that and to, bring us the word. It was very inspirational the last time he was here.
Yeah.
So we're thankful that he's back. I will say that Chip and Pam Wilson, who are good friends with him, are sponsoring a get-together Sunday afternoon. He preaches on Sunday morning, but I believe at 4 o'clock here in the fellowship hall is a chance to talk and kind of chat with Thomas and his wife and learn more about ways that we can be involved. So,
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunities to not just connect to the church, but connect to our local community, but also our international brotherhood in Christ. So
Sure.
come check out what's going on here at Hickory Flats. As for the podcast, if there's anything that you'd like to add some comments to, you drop it in the chats below on the Facebook, the YouTube. If there's anything that you'd like to privately tell either of us, you can send us emails. Without any further ado, Dave,
God bless.
y'all take care.